In our last video, we discussed the 5 branches of philosophy. In this video, we'll be discussing the relationship between philosophy and logic. You can see the way that I've attempted to visually represent the relationship between the 5 branches of philosophy, as well as logic. Logic is not a separate branch of philosophy. Instead, you might think of it like the foundation of all philosophy, or the underpinning that makes all philosophy possible. There are some areas of logic that are outside the realm of philosophy. For example, in these areas, you might think of these areas outside this pyramid of philosophy representing something like math, which is logical, but not especially or particularly philosophical, though there is such a thing as philosophy of math and number theory, but that's more advanced than what we need to discuss today. You'll also notice that there are areas of the pyramid of philosophy that poke outside of logic. For example, the artwork we discussed last time, Marcel Duchamp's urinal hung in an art gallery, might be up here, poking outside of logic. Or perhaps Salvador Dali's painting of the melting clocks would poke outside of the logical, but they would still be in the realm of the aesthetic, of artistic and beautiful. And there are also areas in especially metaphysics that poke outside of what traditionally is logical. For example, in Christianity, the idea of the Godhead as a trinity, and at the same time being one complete unified being. That would be an example of something that transcends logic or goes beyond traditional human logic in this realm or in this world, or perhaps even in this universe. So this idea that God is both 3 and not 3, 1 and not 1 at the same time, is a metaphysical idea. It deals with what's beyond physics, but it goes beyond logic as well. Most of the rest of philosophy deals in terms of logic, though, or at least I've tried to present them in this manner graphically. You can see that I've put metaphysics as the foundation upon which everything else is built. However, it is possible that metaphysics should be on the top, and that instead the foundation is what we find beautiful or pleasing, and everything else is built upon that. You might even consider, instead of merely inverting this pyramid, you might imagine 5 circles overlapping, one corresponding to each: aesthetics, political philosophy, ethics, epistemology, and metaphysics, as sort of a 5-part Venn diagram. What I'm attempting to explain is that the relationship between these branches of philosophy and logic, which isn't a branch of philosophy per se, could be represented in various ways, and they overlap and interact in various ways. Just to finish, then, especially the relationship between political philosophy, ethics, epistemology, and metaphysics, we should spend at least an extra moment considering. A person's metaphysical beliefs, their ideas about the ultimate nature of reality, likely inform everything else. So if a person believes in a God, or in this version of God, or that understanding of God, that will affect their ethics, what they think counts as knowledge, and what they think is ethical will also inform what they would prefer politically, or what they would advocate politically. So that politics is built on top of personal ethics. Politics is perhaps a sort of group ethics, or an attempt at group ethics. The relationship between epistemology and metaphysics is interesting too. A person who finds divine revelation, for example, especially convincing, is not only going to have that inform their ethics and politics, but that will also determine their beliefs about supernatural matters, gods, devils, angels, demons, heavens and hells, afterlives. If a person is not especially convinced by divine revelation, if perhaps they're more convinced by the hard-nosed method of the scientific method and its epistemology, then their metaphysic might therefore be different, though not necessarily. Lastly, the relationship between ethics and politics might go either way. It might be the case that what we think is ethical is what we then think should be allowed politically. For example, on issues of abortion, homosexuality, a person's metaphysical beliefs associated with their epistemological preferences or ideas will inform their ethics and then inform their politics. But there is a possibility that the relationship works more in the other way. That what is legal, people think is ethical. And that we form our ethics based on what society allows. So that if speeding is illegal, then speeding is unethical. We could think of lots of different examples of that sort of relationship between politics and ethics. But let's move on now to issues of logic specifically. I've attempted to define logic as the foundation of all philosophical argument. It analyzes the structure and format of arguments to determine how effective and persuasive they are. Usually logic is divided into two types: deductive logic, or deductive reasoning, or deduction, and inductive logic, inductive reasoning, or induction. Deductive logic relies on deducing from known general principles some particular piece of information about a given case, such as in the famous example, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. In this case, you see that we have a general principle, all men are mortal. We apply it to a specific case, Socrates is a man, and therefore deduce some new piece of information, that Socrates, therefore, logically, is mortal. Inductive logic, or inductive reasoning, works the opposite way. It makes an inference or infers from a trend of information, something about the future that can only be known by making an educated guess. For example, whenever I created this lecture series, I identified the following logical argument: that on August 23rd, 2014, it was hot in Texas. On August 24th, 2014, it was hot in Texas. And so, therefore, inferring from that trend, I was making an educated guess that likely today, August 25th, 2014, it will be hot in Texas. I can tell you, my guess was accurate. In this case, I've taken a trend. The last day has been hot, the day before has been hot, therefore likely this day will also be hot, and made a guess about something probabilistic. However, you might notice that there may in fact be more overlap than often people think that there might be. These two types of logic may not be as cut and dry as they're often thought of as. For example, in the first case, I said it's a known general principle that all men are mortal. However, that actually is an inference. I'm making a guess that because everybody before has died, that likely everybody in the future will die. But I don't know that. There are various ways in which that might turn out to be untrue. For example, if scientists cure death, then people will not be mortal. And this premise in the logical argument will not be true, and therefore the argument will not be what's called valid. Or perhaps something like a Christian rapture will occur, and the faithful will be caught up in the air, in which case there would be some people who will not taste death and therefore would not be mortal. So, in fact, in the first example, that actually sounds a lot more like induction and an inference rather than deduction. Similarly, you might, if you're very perceptive, see the possibility that in the second example, instead of taking a trend of information, what I've really done is deduced from the known general principle that August is hot in Texas. I've merely applied that to one specific day and identified that one specific day will likely be hot in Texas. So, even though these are often thought of as mutually exclusive, in fact, there may be more wiggle room or overlap between them than people often think. Let's go on to the next slide. Here I've given an example of a very relevant logical statement or simplified argument. The statement that you see at top, either Austin is the capital city of Texas or Dallas is, which I've listed a T after representing true, is what's called a disjunctive syllogism. That's a fancy name for an either-or statement. In the either-or statement, so long as one of the two sides of the statement is true, the disjunctive syllogism is considered to be true. In this case, Austin really is the capital city of Texas. Dallas is not. So since the sentence says either Austin is the capital city of Texas or Dallas is, and Austin really is the capital city of Texas, that statement is therefore logically true. We've discovered a truth. A small truth, but a truth nonetheless. Interestingly, if both sides of the either-or statement are both true, then the statement is still considered to be true. It sounds very weird in our normal day-to-day language, but that's how it works in terms of logic. If both sides of the either-or statement are false, the statement is considered to be false, such as in the example, either Fort Worth is the capital city of Texas or Dallas is. That statement that I've just given is false because neither of the two is true. Neither Dallas nor Fort Worth is actually the capital city of Texas. Take the example following that from a text called the Apology of Socrates, written by Plato. In this text, which we'll study in detail later this semester, Socrates is on trial for his life, facing the death penalty for the crimes of corrupting the youth and being an atheist. And I'll give you a spoiler. He's convicted and executed. But during the course of the trial, Socrates speaks the following statement, which has the same logical form as the disjunctive syllogism. He says, either death is a state of nothingness and utter unconsciousness, or, as men say, there is a change and migration of the soul from this world to another. And I've identified this statement as logically true. Socrates has managed to articulate a true statement about the afterlife. Either there is no afterlife, or there is. Socrates is speaking truly in logical terms. So long as one of those two things is true, either the afterlife doesn't exist or it does, he has spoken a truth about something it's ridiculously hard to speak truly about. I mean, in that case, ridiculously hard in epistemological terms. It's difficult to know what the nature of the afterlife is, or even if there is one. But even though Socrates has spoken the truth, the people of his society don't want to hear it. The people of his society just want to believe what everybody else believes, that death really isn't nothingness, that death is just a transition. And for Socrates, to force them to think about the possibility that they may be wrong, this probably contributes to his being executed by his state. The people of his society don't want to consider the possibility that they could be wrong. All Socrates has done has spoken the truth. And this is an important principle that it would do well for everyone to keep in mind, which is that you can tell the truth, but if people don't want to hear it, it can be dangerous for you. I think that danger is still real today, even as it was in Socrates' time. We'll pick up in the next video with what are called informal logical fallacies.